Thank you, everybody, for joining us for today's program. And as we commemorate and celebrate Women's History Month this month, and today's presentation is called Feminine and Fierce, Female Pirate Queens of the Seven Seas. And we're going to be talking about some of these pirate queens that are pretty well known in history. And then there's some lesser known pirate queens. And I have to say that there are some interesting women here and their reasons for heading to sea. So we're going to try to talk about all of that. And so let me make sure that my screen here is working properly. There we are. So here's a picture of the ocean. The ocean is very beautiful, but it can also be dangerous. The sea was here before man. It cradles humans and man. It's like a mother to a sailor. It is seen as the mother of all, giving life to strange creatures, stories of mermaids, humans, and even the gods. In some cases, the ocean was known as she or referred to as she. And of course, there's so many different myths about having women at sea or even ships that are named for women. But I mentioned at the beginning in that description there about some of the gods. And we do have a number of different gods and goddesses across the cultures. And here's a few that I'd like to introduce you to that have some kind of connection to the sky as well as the ocean. So just a number of different goddesses, as we mentioned, from across the world and across cultures. So I'm going to start up here at the top with Galinti. She is from the country of Benin, and she is a sky goddess. She is the goddess of the night sky as well as the stars. And it was said that her husband was the god of the sun or the moon. And from occasions as he moved across her face, there would be some kind of eclipse. And we head underneath Galenti, we see Selene, who was a Greek goddess, and you can see on top of her head what looks like the crescent moon. So she was the goddess of the moon. And of course, if we head to Greek and Roman mythology, we have Artemisia, Artemis, I should say, or Diana, who was the goddess of the hunt. Across from her, we have the Roman goddess Luna, who also wears a half crown or a half moon shape. And then below her, we have Yamaya, who was a goddess of the Yoruba and parts of the Caribbean. And she was also known in African mythology as one of few water goddesses, and she could be seen as a human or as a mermaid. And her name meant the mother of all. She gave birth to all the creatures. I show this to you because women throughout history have been shown in a variety of ways when it comes to the water. Women were idolized in figureheads in those dangerous seas. As we mentioned, the ships were named for women. You can see here a couple of images from our collection that shows this woman who's posing to be part of a figurehead that will go on board a ship. Of course, you've got mermaids. As I mentioned at the beginning, the ocean is seen as dangerous, sometimes giving life and also taking it away. But as we focus on some of these women in history and kind of looking at them as pirates, we need to kind of look at what exactly a pirate was during those time periods. And most of the time, when we look at our movies and television shows and plays, when they're referring to pirates, they're usually looking at men. So we have a poster here of how to look like a real pirate. They would have their hat. They would have tobacco stains. They would have beards, boozy breath, as it says here, scars and wounds, and pistols and all kinds of weapons. You can see that women in pirate movies were all typically seen as the love interest, as you see as Olivia de Havilland in Captain Blood. Going down to Pirates of the Caribbean, you can see aboard ship that a number of these sailors who turned into sea creatures are predominantly male. But as we look at female pirates in pop culture, you don't always see them as those women who would have been those love interests, as we mentioned. The women here on this screen that you're looking at here were feminine, but they were also very fierce in their own right. So at the top, you have Gina Davis in the movie Cutthroat Island. You have Claire Paget down here at the bottom, who is portraying Anne Bonny in the TV show Black Sails. You have Jean Peters, who was Anne of the Indies. You have Ava Green, who is playing Artemisia in the 300 series. Again, moving across, we go back to Keira Knightley and Zoe Saldana in Pirates of the Caribbean. There are even female pirates shown in some of the video games today. So this is an image of Anne Bonny again in the video game Assassin's Creed, which also is known as the Black Flag. So there are a number of different pirate queens throughout history. Some of them we have some historical information. Others, a lot of the information that comes out about them is from tales and from myths. But all the women that you see on this screen had their own reasons for why they turned to piracy. Now, some of them headed out because it was a new adventure. They were bored with life on land. Some of them turned to it because they needed money. Some were running away. Some of them were running away from an arranged marriage. Others from an abusive relationship. Some of them just wanted to see the world. Some of them turned to piracy out of necessity. And then there are those who turn to piracy out of revenge. So here on the screen, as I mentioned, is just a number of different pirate queens throughout history. And I've highlighted in kind of a goldish color of a few of these queens that we're going to talk about. And again, keep in mind that again, these women went to sea for a number of reasons. And in some cases, they may not have been considered as pirates at all. They would be more of a military, in a military instance or as a warrior, but we're including them in this presentation today. So let us turn into our first pirate queen, and her name was Queen Elisa or Dido, and she was born in 879 BC in Tyre, Lebanon. And well, we're going to talk a little bit about when she died, but that took place in 759 BC in Carthage, Tunisia. So her story begins that she had a couple different names. In Greek legend, she was known as Elisa, and her father was the founder of, well, actually, she was the founder of Carthage, which is in the northern part of Africa, part of the modern country of Tunisia today. But she was the daughter of the Tyrian king Muto, or Belus, and she was also wife to a Cerberus. And it was said that her and her husband always took to the seas together as a pair. Now, unfortunate for her, her husband was slain by her brother, and that led to her fleeing to the northern coast of Africa, where she purchased a little small land from a local chieftain, and that is where the kingdom or the empire of Carthage is going to be founded. And this city is going to prosper under Elisa. And she also is going to give carte blanche to her sailors to head out into the sea and turn to piracy. And this was something that in her country was going to be held up by law. Now, What's interesting about that is that they're going to attack the Romans left and right. And then they kind of left her alone until one day her pirates actually attacked a different ship, a ship that had a little bit of an official on there. And unfortunately, the Romans are going to chase after her. She's eventually going to be captured. But then this is where the story kinds of change. So there is an author by the name of Virgil, and he kind of reshaped her story to make it that she fell in love with a man by the name of Aeneas, and that after he landed in Africa, that he all of a sudden just abandoned her and that she committed suicide. Then there's another story that she put a curse on the Trojans, and that as she died, this curse is going to take on, and but still saying that she committed suicide. And then that's kind of where her story leaves off. And so we were able to find a couple of different images here. You can see here down at the bottom that she has made her way into Africa and that she's actually building the city of Carthage. The same thing with the coin that bears her name. But we're going to move on to another woman. And as I said, not all of these women would have been considered as pirates. This particular one that I'm going to introduce you to, in history, I think they would probably called her more of a military officer, unless you were the Greeks. So this is Artemisia the First of Halicarnassus, which is part of the modern day country of Turkey. And she is named for the Greek goddess Artemis, or Diana, the goddess of the hunt and moon. And she's actually often confused with Artemisia the Second, who was the wife of King Menelaus of Halicarnassus. So if you've heard of the mausoleum there at Halicarnassus, which is one of the seven wonders of the world, that was Artemisia the Second who was going to be buried there. So we're going to focus on our Artemisia the First here. And I have a picture again of Ava Green down here at the bottom because there was a movie as the second part of a movie called The 300 that's going to take place. The first 300 actually took place on land. The second one actually takes place at the same time, but it's going to be on the Battle of Salamis, which was an actual battle in Greek history. Now, we don't have a record, and I haven't been able to find one of her sea career prior to her coming under the charge of Xerxes, who was the Persian king who was trying to take over most of the Greek islands. But it is clear that she did have one. And there is the Battle of Salamis that took place in 480 BC and under Xerxes. And Xerxes felt that he could not have power over the Greeks without having a battle or some kind of victory over the Athenians. And so he's going to use a number of different ships. He's going to use biremes and triremes. And down here at the bottom is one example of a bireme that we have in our collection. And some of these boats that he's going to be using for his Navy are anywhere from about 80 to 130 feet long. And they would have either 2 rows of oars, that's your biremes, or they would have 3 rows, which are going to be your triremes. And this is all going to be human powered, and you will have your sails to use the winds. Now, the Athenians are going to set a trap that's going to lure the Persian sailors and ships into the Straits of Salamis, which was a small island that had a narrow corridor. And what they're hoping is that as these large biremes and triremes try to get into this narrow strait, that it would be very difficult for them to back out and that the Athenians can attack and attack them under surprise. So they were going to be rapidly destroyed during this battle. But what happens is that Artemisia is one of the main generals for Xerxes' army. And she realizes that the Persians are being drawn into a trap. So before her ship can enter, it is said that she is going to try to get her ship out of the way. The only problem is she's blocked in by another ship. So she's going to take her ship called the Lycos, and she rammed into that ship at full speed. Now, some sources say that she had actually lowered the Persian flag and put up a Greek flag in hopes that it would cause a little bit of confusion. Now, others say that she is going to routinely sail with both of them and she would raise one or the other depending on where she was. But advisors to Xerxes believe that she sunk an enemy ship. Historians say that that wasn't the case, that she ended up ramming one of her own. But from Xerxes' point of view, that was a victory that she sent a Greek ship down to its depths. Now, unfortunate for Artemisia, that is where her story kind of leaves off. We're not exactly sure what happens to her directly after this battle. It is said that she eventually went inland and became the tutor for some of Xerxes' children. But what we know for sure is that she kind of disappears from the histories. Moving on, we have Queen Teta of Illyria, and she is written about in a book called The Histories, which was on the rise of the Roman Empire. And Illyria was just across the Adriatic Sea, and this is where you would find the Balkan Peninsula here. Now, under Teta, she got a particular nickname. She was known as the Terror of the Adriatic Sea, because like Queen Elisa, she is going to take to piracy, and again, she's going to encourage her sailors, her navy, to do so as well. Now, for her, again, this is also going to be part of law. It was a free commercial enterprise recognized by law. Now, the law says they could plunder as much as they would like, both on land as well as on sea. But all of the money, any riches that they got their hands on, would have to be brought back to Illyria. The queen would take her share, and then everything else will be separated out amongst the sailors. Sometimes they were very successful. Other times, the queen herself would accompany her sailors and navy out on these pirating adventures. But finally, she is going to grow tired of the sea and she's going to return home. But she's going to set her sights on Rome itself. So one of her ships is going to attack some Roman vessels. They're taking all these goods. One particular ship also had some Roman officials on it. Now, usually the ships would just deal with what's happening with them. Excuse me. They would just deal with what they're happening with and they would try another venture. This particular ship, the officers that are going to be attacked, is actually going to go up to the Roman government and actually complain about her. But she's also going to pick up a campaign that her husband had against the Romans. And this is going to cause a little bit of, actually, I should say, a lot of issues for the Romans. So in 229 BCE, the Romans declared war on Illyria, and they're going to mobilize against her. Now, even though she has a large navy, the Roman navy is much larger and overpowered her. They were able to gain control of all the areas surrounding Illyria, assuring the people that they would protect them. Her own governor is going to betray her. And for his betrayal, the Romans are actually going to give him a part of the bounty. And after a year-long siege in 239 BCE, she is finally going to have to surrender. And sadly, she is also going to disappear from the history books. There is a note that her son Phineas is going to ascend to the throne when he becomes of age. And you can see a little bit of that down here at the bottom. But also in parts of the Balkans, you can see that there is a statue that is in memory and in honor of this pirate queen. Now, I also mentioned that there were a few pirate queens that we do not know a whole lot about. And some of those are going to be some of these Scandinavian princesses and queens. Now, there's a few pirate queens that I was able to find their names, like Princess Sella, Rusula, Stilka. There was another one that I found. Her name is Alwilda or Alwida. And she was born around 790 to 1000 CE. She was the daughter of Seward, who was the king of the Goths. And her name in Old Norse means to shine, gleam, and a supernatural being. In ancient Germanic, her name meant battle or to fight. Now, Alwida was known to be a very beautiful woman and had a lot of wealth. So she had a lot of suitors. Now, her father ends up taking a liking to one particular suitor who happened to be a prince. But prior to getting to allowing this prince to marry her, he's going to have a series of different challenges for them to meet. Now, if you do not meet all of these challenges, then your prize, as it will, would be a beheading. But for the case of this particular prince, he is actually going to pass all of these challenges. His name was Prince Alf, and the king welcomed him, but Alwida rejected him. So much so that she stole a boat and took a few maidens with her and headed out to sea, and that started her pirating career. Now, during her journeys, she would encounter a pirate ship that had no captain, and she absorbed that pirate crew into her home, making hers a little bit wider. But finally, Prince Alf is going to take to the seas, and you can see right in here that Alwida's pirates are fighting against Prince Alf. And finally, when she sees how handsome he is, she finally gives up pirating. They both head back to sea, actually back to land, and they marry and they become and remain as the king and queen of Denmark. And again, that's where her story ends. Up at the top here is actually one of the artifacts that we have in our collection from Scandinavia. This one's particularly from the Vikings, and this would be the head that would go on part of your boat. Now, I will say that this next pirate queen, as the more and more that I've learned about her, she is slowly becoming one of my favorite pirate queens to talk about. Her name is Jeanne de Cleason, and she was known as the Lioness of Brittany. Now, she was born Jeanne de Belleville, and she was born on a fortress on the western coast of France. She got married at the age of 12 to a nobleman, and she had 2 children. Unfortunate for her, her husband passed away in 1326, so she remarried her second husband. His name is Olivier de Clinson, and she married him in 1330, and she had 5 more children. So she's probably about 15, 16 years old at this time. She has 7 children, and she's on her second husband. Now, there's something called the War of Breton Accession. And her husband, Olivier, has a friend, and his name is Charles de Blois. Now, he is trying to get his claim to this particular land of Brittany. Now, de Blois is a little angry with Olivier because several years prior, during a particular battle with the British in 1342, He was captured as a prisoner, and then sometime later, it's a short time later, he is going to be released. Now, Charles de Boyson figures that either the ransom was too small or that he must have given up some kind of information to just have the British let him go. Whatever it may have happened, and maybe it didn't happen at all. What we do know is Charles de Blois was quite angry and wanted to exact revenge on Olivier. So he sent him out on a mission. There was some kind of tournament that he wanted Olivier to fight in. So Olivier leaves Jean to this tournament, if you will, and he is going to be arrested. He's going to be brought back to court, and he's going to be found guilty of treason. And in France, one of the punishments for treason is going to be a beheading. Now, she is quite upset with Charles de Blois, who was supposed to be a family friend. Now, she is so angry, she cuts all ties with de Blois. She picks up her children, what money her husband has left for her, and heads to England. She gets to England, she buys a number of ships, which she calls the Black Fleet. And down here at the bottom, you can see a small image of that. She's going to paint all of her ships black, but she's going to paint the sails blood red, and she's going to take to the seas. Now, we're not sure if she's going to be defined as a pirate or a privateer. A privateer has the permission of the king or queen to attack their enemies. Pirate is a little bit different. So perhaps for the British, she is a pirateer. But to the French, she would be considered as a pirate. And she took no quarter, meaning she is not going to take any hostages except for one. She would leave at least one alive, and their only duty was to take a message back to France to let them know that she is the one responsible for the taking of the ships and the taking of their crew. And as you can see there, she painted her sails blood red. She wanted the French to know she was coming. Now, what's interesting is that her pirate career lasted 13 years. 13 years. And she only gave it up when the King of France, who was Philip IV, died in 1350. And at that point, I think she felt that her bloodlust had been sated, and she gave up piracy for a life in the English countryside. She's going to marry Sir Walter Bentley, who happened to be the deputy of King Edward III. Now, there is some evidence in 1343, and this is in a French document, that claims that her lands were going to be forfeited when she betrayed France in their eyes. So the English are going to grant her income as a privateer. But then eventually there's going to be a truce that takes place between France and England in 1347. And it's also said in this document that she got her land back. And after that, we really don't know what else happened to her, but we do know that she died in 1359. And again, Jeanne de Clisson, the Lioness of Brittany. Another pirate queen, if you will, that I found that was quite interesting is Lady Mary Killigrew. And she's sometimes mistaken for her mother-in-law, whose name is Elizabeth Killigrew, and she also may have done some pirating herself. But Lady Mary was born into a pirating family around 1525, and her family had, for generations, had been in the business of piracy. Her father was Philip Wolverton, who was known as Lord Wolverton, and had been a pirate in Suffolk, England. Now, for Lady Mary, she has been married twice. Her second husband is Sir Henry Killigrew. He had also been a pirate, but then later on, he had become the vice admiral for Queen Elizabeth I. Now, their castle down here at the bottom, or their house, I should say, is Arnak House in Cornwall, and that was her base of operations. And what's interesting is that they would have, they would have a number of different politicians and other dignitaries that would come to their home. And during the day, she would be the proper English lady. She would give them all the amenities and show them a nice stay. And during the evening and during the night, Lady Mary and her pirates would rob them blind. She would get everybody drunk, and as the captains are a little bit loose, they're giving up information, and she would use that to steal from them. It was even said that in one instance, she got the whole entire party drunk, and then ended up slitting all of their throats, and then still taking their boats. By the way, she's doing all of this while her husband is the vice admiral and commissioner for the Queen of England, Queen Elizabeth I. His job as the commissioner was to chase after and arrest anyone suspected or found guilty of piracy. So that is his job, and his wife underneath his nose. Or did he know? Not sure. But she was doing this all at the same time. Now, there's been a couple of times that she was able to get away with this, and then she made one major mistake. She robbed a merchant ship that was in the harbor, and the captain ran straight to the queen. Now, the queen is going to demand her arrest. She's going to be found, arrested, and then the story changes a little bit. Now, depending on who you believe, she was sentenced to death, but then pardoned. There's another story that says that her family bribed those at the jail and any of the judges to let her out. Now, we don't know which story to believe. We just know that she was let go and she went right back to piracy. And this kept up for a number of years, but unfortunately, that is where her story ends as well. But again, coming from a long line of piracy, again, a woman who is the perfect English lady during the day and a sometimes vicious pirate in the evening. Now, this next woman, she is one that took to the seas for a completely different reason. It wasn't for revenge. It wasn't for money. It was actually for patriotism. So this next woman, her name is Lascarina, and I'm going to try to pronounce her last name, Bobolina. And she was born in a prison in Constantinople while her mother was visiting her father. Now, he had been imprisoned during the Peloponnesian Revolution of 1769. Unfortunate for her, her father is going to die in prison, and her mother are going to move to the island of Hydra, which you see right in here. And she stayed there for a number of years. And she loved the sea so much that both of her husbands were sea captains, and they had left her money after their deaths. And with that money, she purchased a number of ships. Now, again, this is when the Ottoman Empire is trying to take over parts of the Mediterranean Sea, and she's going to take her money. She's going to buy a fleet of 8 ships, and one of her ships is called the Agamemnon, and it was the largest warship of her fleet. And she took to the seas, raiding Turkish ships during the Greek rebellion. So for the Greeks, she's going to be considered as a patriot, but to the Turks and the Turkish Navy, she is going to be seen as a pirate. Now, unfortunately, she died May 22nd, 1825. So she does survive the rebellion, and she was held in such high regard by the Greek people that she is going to be put upon their money. And this is an image here in our collection that shows a different side of her, as well as a statue that you can find. I believe it's in her homeland of Hydra, that you can find there of her. And they say that some people say that Greek independence would not have been possible without her attacking all the Turkish fleet. So this is Lascarina. Now we also have an Islamic pirate queen. This is Saada Ahora. Her name means the woman sovereign who exercises power. Unfortunate for us, her real name is going to be lost to history. But what we do know is that she was born in 1485 to a Muslim family in the Kingdom of Grenada. Her family is going to leave in 1492. Now, there's a lot of things taking place in 1492, but the modern country of Spain had been under Moorish control during that time. So in 1492 is when the various kingdoms of Spain, like Grenada, are going to rise up, and they're finally able to kick the Moors out of the Iberian Peninsula for good. They had already been kicked out of Portugal a few decades before. Now, I will tell you that Saada is very bitter against the Europeans or anyone who is of the Christian faith. And she took this with her when her family was left to leave. Now, they are going to settle in Morocco, and she gets married to her husband, who was the governor of Tetuan here, which is on the Mediterranean Sea, not very far from Tangiers. But she's going to be involved in politics, and she's going to rule side by side with her husband. She's going to become his prefect when he dies in 1515. Now, keeping in mind that she understands that she is a woman, and she's in a woman who is left to defend her home. So in order to do that, she's going to contact a pirate by the name of Baba Rook, who was one of the Barbosa brothers, Barbosa meaning red beard. But she's going to take his advice to take to the seas, and with her hatred against Christians for driving her family out of their home, she felt piracy was the best way to go. And according to legend, as well as some records from the Spanish and the Portuguese who dealt with her, they considered her a legitimate naval power, maybe even a threat to their authority. Now, on one hand, I mentioned that there were pirate queens who lasted 13 years. Well, Saada Ahora lasted 20 years. 20 years as a pirate. She plundered European vessels, she took Christian hostages, and any money or other treasures she put back into her land and gave to her people. She was the main negotiator with the Spanish and Portuguese, so much so that she earned the title of Ahora, and she was the last person to hold this title. Now, from there, this is the part of the story that just interests me, and it always kind of tickles me. 1541, the Sultan of Fez fell in love with her and asked for her hand in marriage. Now, she was content to marry him, but only if he came to her. So Fez is right kind of in the middle of Morocco. So the Sultan is going to travel to her on the coast, and she agrees to marry him, but under one other condition. So the first one was he had to travel to her. The second one was that when they got married, they can rule together, but he is going to rule in Fez and she is going to stay where she is and she will rule there. And he agreed. It's the only time in Moroccan history that I've been able to find that this was going to happen. It's unprecedented, but it did happen, and she stayed where she was as ruler. Sadly, her rule is going to come to an end in 1542 when one of the king's sons deposes her. But what's interesting is that her town, her country, or her Medina, as it's called, is now a UNESCO World Heritage Site. It has particular importance because of the layout. It's also a fine example of Islamic architecture. So it is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. And then, of course, I'm sure you've all heard of Anne Bonny and Mary Read. And before I give you some more information that we were able to find, what's interesting about Anne Bonny and Mary Read is that what we know of them really comes from their court cases when they were arrested and tried as pirates. But these women, as I showed at the beginning, are found throughout our pop culture in TV shows, like I mentioned, for Black Sail. But there's also songs about them as well. This one particular song that I'm going to try to play is about Anne Bonny. So let's see if this will actually work. And we'll only play a part of it.
So Wisteria, it did not share. You'd
Okay.
have to click share audio when you go share screen.
Okay, well, I will see if I can try to do that towards the end. Thank you for letting me know that. If not, I can always share the link for that as well. I do apologize that that didn't kick in. But let's talk a little bit about Anne Bonny. So Anne Bonny was born around the early 1700s in Ireland. She was the daughter of a lawyer and one of his domestic servants. Now, unfortunate, her father's wife is going to find out that he had taken her in and she decided to cut off his financial support. So she's later going to move with her father to Charlestown, South Carolina, which we know today to be Charleston, South Carolina. And unfortunate for her, her mother is going to pass away when she was 12 years old. Now, Anne Bonny is going to marry a small-time pirate by the name of James Bonny, which her father is going to disapprove of. She is going to be disowned by her father and is going to be kicked out. And so she was known for her fiery temper, and there was rumor that she may have set her father's plantation on fire in retaliation for kicking her out. Now, around 1714, 1718, James and Anne are going to be living in Nassau in the Bahamas. And this is where James had become an informant for the governor of the Bahamas. It may have been at this time that Anne Bonny is going to meet a pirate by the name of Calico Jack Rackham. Calico Jack gets his name because of all the colorful patches that he wore in his clothing. Now, she is going to ask for a divorce from her husband. He refuses, so she decides to join Calico Jack's crew, and she does dress like a man while she's on board. Now, there is another pirate that is found on board. Her name is Mary Read, and she was born around 1695 in a place called St. Catherine's, Jamaica. Now, her mother had married a sailor and also had one son. Now, her husband is going to run off. The son passes away, but Mary's mother wants to continue getting money from her grandmother, so she decided to dress Mary up as a boy to continue getting that money on. Eventually, Mary is going to grow up. She moves on. She has a job as a servant. And it is later she is going to join the military as a man. And this is where in that military service that person is going to reveal themselves to be a woman. And they eventually end up leaving the ship. Then as they were on board after his death, she's going to return to the sea, still dressed as a man, and this is when she joins the crew of Calico Jack Rackham. Now, while Anne is on board, dressed as a man, another sailor who happens to be a woman is going to fall in love with her. They ended up fighting a little bit until both women reveal themselves to be women. And at that point, they go to Calico Jack Rackham. Now, he already knows about Anne Bonny being on board. And so he was a little bit surprised, but not angry when he realizes that Mary is not a man. And from that point, both women are going to be known to be women on board Calico Jack's ship, and they dress in trousers, as you see in the picture here, but clearly as women as they reveal themselves. Now, both Anne and Mary are gained a reputation for their ruthlessness as well as their brutality. And there is a one account, and it's this one right here, that she fell in love with another male crew member and decided that she was going to duel another one of the sailors on board to protect him. And that's this image right up in here, again showing that she was female. Now, at some point while they're out at sea, the crew is going to steal another ship. They say that the ship belonged to a privateer, but they were tracked down and a huge fight is going to break out on decks. Now, the story goes that perhaps the men might have been drunk and that they didn't fight as valiantly as the women thought they should, but the men were down below decks. Anne and Mary are going to be up on the decks and they are going to fight until they are overpowered. And it is said November 1720, all are going to be arrested. The men are going to be tried, convicted, and hanged for the crime of piracy. And before his hanging, it is said that Mary is going to visit Calico Jack Rackham and is quoted as saying, "Had you fought like a man, you would not be dying like a dog." Do we know if she really said that? Not entirely sure. But for a man who was convicted of piracy, that just had to sting just a bit. We do know that both women were found guilty. They were also convicted of the crime of piracy, and they were sentenced to hang. But from the court records, it says that both women are going to be essentially put in jail because they had pleaded with their belly. And for anyone that may not know what that means, pleading with the belly during that time means to be with child. Do we know if both women were with child? Not entirely sure. We know at least one of them were. And there were not the methods that we have today to be able to test and examine if a woman was pregnant. So they were taken at their word, put in prison, and then that's where the rest is history. It is written that Mary Read died in prison of a fever, and unfortunately, not really entirely sure what happened to Anne Bonny. We don't know what happened to any child that may have been born as well. But again, these two women are held in pirate history, in world history, and there are statues in various places of Anne Bonny and Mary Read. Also, we're heading into our Irish pirate queen. This is Grace OMalley, who was born in 1530. And legend has that as she was growing up, she would cut her hair off and she would dress as a boy and head to sea. Now, later on in life, she's going to marry a man by the name of Donald O'Flannery, who was known as Donald the Battle. Now, unfortunately, he was killed in another battle and she took over. She's going to lead his former troops to attack a place called Cox Castle, and she's going to later rename it as Hen's Castle when she became victorious. Now she's going to return to Clues Bay, and she's going to start to build her pirate kingdom or empire, as it said, from her father. She actually took over a number of ships that were left to her. She got married a second time, married Richard Burke, and she is going to solidify her power. And they have a base known as Rockfleet Castle. And this was one of the few pictures that I was able to find for it. As she gets married the second time, she gets a little bit tired of him. And in Irish law, you could actually get a divorce after 1 year, and divorce was pretty easy for her. She waited until he got outside of the castle, closed the gate on him, went up to the very top tower, and yelled out, "Richard Burke, I dismiss you." And that was the end of their marriage. Eventually, she let him come back and they continued on with their pirating together. In 1577, she's going to be captured by the Earl of Desmond for raiding his land. She spent time in jail. And at some point, she did not stop, but eventually, the English want Ireland as a colony. She is going to be called to meet with the Queen of England at the time. And this is the only image that I was able to find that may have shown Grace OMalley meeting with Queen Elizabeth I. She eventually gets her son's pardon, they retain property, and then a few years later, she takes back to sea. Her sons take back to the seas. Her son later becomes the Viscount of Mayo, and in 1603, Grace OMalley joined many others in infamy, and she died at home peacefully at Rockfleet Castle, where it was said she was buried next to the sea that she loved so much. Also, several famous songs of Grace OMalley as well. And this leads us to our final pirate queen of this presentation. And this is, and I'm hoping I pronounced her name correct, Chen Xiao. And she is, historians have estimated that she may have been the most successful pirate of all, male or female. Now, piracy in Asia at the time, just like in the West, was one of the oldest professions in the world. And it was not uncommon to see women at sea aboard Chinese junks. Now, as I mentioned, she's considered to be one of the most famous pirates and most successful. She was born around 1775, and there's very little known of her early life. But as she was growing up, it was said that she was in another profession that's known to be one of the world's oldest. And I'll give you a hint. This is an artifact that is in our collection. It's called a Chinese flower boat, or better known as a Chinese pleasure boat. And there were large numbers of these, and that she would serve on these ships. But we do know that around 1802, she gets married and she solidifies her power as a pirate queen because her and her husband are going to rule together. They created a confederacy that outnumbered the Spanish Armada 2-1. And in 1804, she became the organizer and she created 6 different squadrons: red, black, white, green, yellow, and blue. Each had their own autonomous leader that would answer directly to her. And she had a number of different rules that applied. One big one is that if you were to steal from her any of the treasure, you would automatically be beheaded. Very, very strict rules, and that was just one. She was the sole voice when it came to any kinds of business actions. And by 1809, the Chinese government felt that she had become much too powerful, but they decided to change tactics. Instead of going a military route, they went a diplomatic route. And so she is going to negotiate for amnesty, not just for herself, but for all of the pirates under her control. And in 1810, she does just that. And so she decided that peace was the best way to go. She was granted that amnesty, and she also was able to get an amount of money for everyone who was involved, all the former pirates, I should say. And so eventually she's going to open up a gambling house in 1313. She also gives birth to one of her children. She would also have a daughter later on. And then unfortunately, when her husband died again at sea in 1822, she moves her family to Macau and she opens up a casino or some kind of gambling house. And then in 1844, she dies in bed surrounded by her family at the age of 69. Never captured, stayed out at sea for a number of years. And again, historians have estimated that she was probably the most successful of them all. So again, there's a number of female pirate queens. Some of them went to the seas for adventure, for money, some of them for revenge, or some of them out of necessity and for patriotism of the land that they love so much. These pirate queens are fierce and feminine, pirate queens that ruled the seven seas. Thank you.
Thank you, Wisteria, for that amazing presentation. Such great information. And yes, these women were feminine and fierce.
Yes.
We have several questions, so I'll start with the two that are in the Q&A box.
Okay.
Mike asked, are those of a military types like privateers with the letter of marquis? I'm not sure.
In some cases, yes. And there are, I know we're talking about female pirates, but there are some other pirates who were privateers, who had that letter of marquis. And I know there's a few of them that lost that letter of marquis. And so instead of being recognized as a privateer by their country, when their enemies captured them, there was really not much they can do and were convicted as pirates. But yes, in some cases, there would be some kind of letter from who you're under.
Okay. Mary asks, what percentage of pirates overall were female?
That I don't know, and that's a very, very good question. This is one of the themes that I'm still trying to research, but I would gather that it's a very small number of what's known. But like some of these women that I mentioned today, some of them dress like men, but I don't have a percentage number. Okay. But that would be interesting to find out.
Okay. And that actually leads us into the next question from Mary. Tell us about their crews. Were there female crews or did they rely on men?
Mostly men, but in on the part that I was talking about, some of the Scandinavian women, particularly Alda, her crew were all female from what we gather until that other crew that she absorbs into them. So she had a mix of men and women, but I don't know how common that was.
Question from Michael. It would be interesting to know how the later lady pirates dressed while they were at sea. Did they continue to wear dresses or did they wear breeches?
Some of the ones like Rachel Wall, and there's another one that her name just escaped me as soon as I started thinking about them. Both of those women actually wore breeches or breeches. There are a few that continued to wear a combination like you see a little bit in the sketch in the middle here, where it was part dress, part breeches, but still more research that we're doing.
Okay, awesome. And then I'm not sure where in the presentation he noted this, but Michael notes that a good novel about these two is The Only Life That Mattered. I don't know if you're familiar with that novel, but it's something to check out.
And I'm writing that down right now. The Only Life That Matters.
Right.
All
That
right.
mattered.
I will try to find that.
Okay. And I believe that's, oh, wait, here's one more question. Do you think the spoils help to fund the various queens and kings?
Yes, I do. With several of the pirate queens, as well as some other male counterparts, a lot of that money was put back into their land. It was put back into their people, and helped fund their voyages, and also gave wealth to their land as well. So yes.
Oh, okay. And Michael notes that the author is James L. Nelson. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, James L. Nelson. I will look that up when I get back to my desk.
Okay, awesome. Well, that concludes the questions that I have. I do want to take just a quick second to say thank you to everyone who joined us today. Sadly, this is the last virtual program that I am moderating because I am leaving the museum next Thursday. Is my last day, and I'm relocating to the Cleveland, Ohio area. So I just want to say thank you for joining us and giving me the opportunity to serve as your moderator. It has been a blast. And no, I'm not saying goodbye to Wisteria until next week. And actually, I'm not even saying goodbye then, just so long.
Nope.
So thank you for joining us today. For those in the area of this really bad weather, stay safe. And we hope to see you at our next program.
Absolutely. Thank you all so much for joining. And again, this was our program celebrating Women's History Month. We'll continue doing that throughout the year. So check back with us for more programming. So everybody have a wonderful day.